Life sometimes hits you in weird ways. For example, last week I promised to make a three-part series on Columbus's exploration of the Americas and how it affected history. The truth is, I got pneumonia instead, and I spent most of the week catching up on some very important literature. In between my delirium and my attempts to understand what I was studying, I discovered something really, really big. I had bitten off more than I could chew. You see, what I was covering had affected the entire world, and Columbus was the center of trying to solve it. Let's start really simply. What do these words have in common? If you haven't figured it out, they're the same word. It means castle. It's just one's German, one's Dutch, one's Old Scottish, and one is Scandinavian in general. There's a couple different spellings, really. And you are wondering, well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, the reality is, there are other connections. For example, Odin, Wotan, or Wotan is in fact the same person. It's the same traveler who gains knowledge and lost an eye. How do we all know this? These cultures are right next to each other and had trade with each other. Thus, we have signs that they have things in common, language, stories, that shows us a much larger trade group than just one small group. We can use this and other methodologies to find connections between cultures throughout Eurasia. There was a northern trade group that touched all the way to Germany, as we know it now, to Korea. You might know it as the Mongolian Empire, but really this trade empire lasted longer than you can imagine and was there during the Roman era. So this brings up a really big statement. Using the exact same methodology as we did with the Germanic peoples, who we know have a history because we can have historical documents showing it is, we have similar traits from the Philippines all the way to North and South America. Not only that, they also have stories that are common. They have ideas that are also common. So it looks like there was a giant trade group between the Pacific Islands and North and South America. And in fact, it happened around 500 years ago. This is common knowledge in academia, but what I'm about to talk about is something greater than that. You probably know the history of the Silk Road, the connection point between India, China, and Europe. It also connected northern Africa. And there was actually another route between northern Africa and southern Africa, but we don't talk about it as much. What you probably don't know is that there was a similar road between South America and North America, and it covered the entire continent. You could say one thing in one part of Alaska and hear it all the way down in the Guarani in South America. These roads are so important that when they get disrupted, things start to happen. For example, when the Silk Road started to fall apart, Europeans desperately tried to find another route. This route led them to exploration, which of course led them to come to the Americas. The thing is, the exact same thing was happening in the Americas. It was happening all over the world. This weird crunch was making trade difficult, even into the Pacific Islands. For example, many of the heiau found in Hawaii, which are ancient temples, started to go towards war gods and other ideas, which is a common sign found when a crunch is happening. There was also less trade and less chance for the Polynesians and Pacific Islanders to go into the Americas. A 500-year gap between now and when they came back. That's kind of amazing, don't you think? And that's kind of where Columbus becomes important. It's true. Tons of people have come to the Americas. It's actually unknown how many different peoples have come to the Americas and how many times they've done it. We do know that there have been Africans, that there were Polynesians, there were Asians, and there were Europeans. But honestly, we don't know how often they've done it, and how many tribes have done it. It's just completely open to us. However, we do know one thing. When Columbus arrived, it stuck. It stayed. They continued to have trade with the Americas and around the world, whether people liked it or not, which is the subject that a lot of people kind of hate Columbus for. The truth be told, When the conquistadores arrived in places like the Aztecs or the Incas, they were helping to rebuild this Silk Road for the Americas, and most of the people actually enjoyed it. The Spanish themselves never really won a major battle. They opened up trade and communications between the peoples, and then eventually said that they had won using great ideas like Quetzalcoatl and others, which was a common excuse made by the Catholic Church of all places as a way to say that the people always viewed the Europeans as greater. This only happens after domination has begun. In fact, even into the 19th century, several tribes used this Silk Road as a way to continue trading and gaining power over many others, including the colonials. Literally, they were trading guns, knives, weapons, whatever they could to move things forward. To be honest with you, the colonial system didn't really work the way we described it. The truth be told, the gun that we always praise didn't really arrive until around 1875, and by that time, the people themselves had already begun losing power. Actually, let me correct myself. They had already lost power, and the people, like the colonials, were moving into areas as a means of protection, because the areas they were going into were areas that other tribes had lost and nobody else was claiming, and they had just continued doing this until they had taken over. This was not a win all the battles type thing. That never happened. If you really want to know, the natives had always held power, even into the American Revolution. They actually declared that the natives themselves were part of the reasons why a revolution was needed, because they couldn't arm themselves fast enough if the English were still in charge. Literally, we would not have the U.S. if the natives weren't so powerful. The reason why you don't hear about this is because schools don't teach you these things. They want you to believe that the white man, the European colonialists, were constantly dominating and winning and doing all of these amazing things against the natives, and that the natives either bowed down or fought and lost in attempts to keep their people together. And then horrible atrocities happened. This is not true. This has been a story told throughout the world after domination had begun. In other words, the story you've been told is a lie. However, once people take over, they start to make up stories. For example, in Hawaii, where a lot of the same things happened, they tell the story that Captain Cook was viewed as some kind of deity, and that he was treated like a deity by all the people, and he was only killed after the other people were like, oh, no, he's not a deity. Even though Hawaiian scholars themselves have said that the people would have figured it out. They would have understood exactly what was happening, and they were merely welcoming a new explorer. This kind of story is told throughout the world by those in dominant power, and the only way we can fight it off is by telling the true story. The one where, yeah, bad things happened, by both sides. And yet, here we are today, and we need to find a way to live together, to love each other. Otherwise, it's just going to be one more war, after another war, until the next crunch happens. And then, well, all the domination will go away, and we will have another set of wars. Personally, I think a day to celebrate Native peoples is a great idea. I would love to talk about old Navajo stories I've heard, or stuff I heard back in Yakima when I was going to high school, or stuff I heard in Hawaii when I was going to college. I would love to tell these stories, or hear these stories, and have more stories being told. This is important to me. I want these people's cultures to be renewed. However, trying to denigrate another side just to raise up another is exactly what got us into this problem in the first place. The truth be told, Columbus's exploration and finding of the Americas is huge. It started an entire revolution. We just need to respect it. We need to allow Columbus Day to have its day. Perhaps 2 days later, the Wednesday after, we can have a Native Day. I think that would be a great idea. So then we can say that the two have met. Because that's what's really happened. And it's time we started to just admit it.